Aleister Crowley's 81st Liber. Moonchild's 22nd chapter is called Of a Certain Dawn Upon Our Old Friend, the Boulevard Arago, and of the loves of Lisa la Giuffria and Abdul Bey, how they prospered, of the conclusion of the false alarm of the great experiment, and of a conference between Douglas and his subordinates. Lord Anthony Bowling was one of 3 men in the War Office who could speak French properly. And as you can tell, I can't speak it perfectly. Despite this drawback, he had been selected to confer with the French headquarters in Paris. Here he met Cyril Gray, busy with his tailor. The young magician had once held a captaincy in a hussar regiment, but a year of India had developed his native love of strange places and peoples. He had been tempted to resign his commission and yielded. He had gone exploring in Central Asia and the deadly districts beyond Assam. He cannot stand gymkhanas, polo, and flirtation. Simon F. had given him a hint now and again of what magic might effect if a war crime, and the boy had profited. He had performed provisional plans. He encountered Lord Antony by chance one evening on the Boulevard LXXXI, dined him, and on finding that all amusements, even that of watching the world from the terrace of a cafe, were to end by order of the military governor of Paris at 8 o'clock, suggested they should spend the evening smoking opium. Ches Zizi, a delightful girl who lived with the brilliant English journalist on the Boulevard Marcel. And of course, I would not be recommending smoking anything. I understand the medicinal properties of whatever and what's needed for survival. No criticism here. But also we need to regard, is it really worth breaking the law and consequences like that to, at midnight, serenely confident that God was in his heaven, as asserted by the late Robert Browning, they decided to finish the night at Cyril's studio. Here the young magician reconstructed the crime of the jumping balls of the mysterious countess and recounted the episode of the thing in the garden to the delectation of the mermen of Mayfair. He then offered to amend Bowling's coat of arms by the introduction of 12 prawns, couchant, gules, gartered azure, and the substitution of poltergeists for the wild men of the ducal escutcheon. Modestly exclaiming, eschaton? Is that how you say it? Oh, that doesn't sound right. Well, I mean, it doesn't sound right for this look. But modestly disclaiming these prolific glories, Lord Antony regaled his host with an ingenious account of Swedish gentlemen who materialized the most voluminous specters from, as subsequently appeared in circumstances which can only be qualified as dramatic. The contents of a steel cylinder measuring 12 inches in length and 3 in diameter, which a search of the medium stripped to the buff had at first failed to disclose, but neither was honesty interested in his own remarks. The subconscious excitement of the war made all conversation on any other topic sound miserably artificial. Bowling's story made them both distrait. They fell into a heavy silence, pondering methods of concealing dispatches or detecting spies. An investigation of spiritualism makes a capital training ground for Secret Service work. One soon gets up to all the tricks. Presently, Cyril Gray began to preach magic. Germany is on a pretty good wicket, he said. She is at war. We have only taken a holiday to go fighting. The first condition of success in magic is purity of purpose. One must let no other consideration interfere with the business in hand. But we are hypocrites in England, consequently. We compromise and fumble. When a magician does get in charge of an affair, all goes pretty well. Look how Simple Simon has isolated Germany. Even there, he has been thwarted by the exchequer. 5 millions in the right place would have bought the Balkans. How much do you think that little economy will cost us before we're through? As for the foolishness of leaving Turkey doubtful, it's beyond all words. Yes, agreed Bowling. We ought to have supported Abdul Hamid from the first. The best kind of Englishman is blood brother to the best kind of Muslim. He is brave, just, frank, manly, and proud. Well, arrogant, perhaps not, but self-reliant, self-assured. We should always be in alliance. Islam against the servile Hindus and so-called Christians. Where is the spirit of the Paladins and the Templars and the Knights of the Round Table? The modern Christian is the bourgeoisie, whose character is based on fear and falsehood. You know, because the vicarious thing, it doesn't have to result in attaining to the good and truth by yourself, but the rest of them, you know, would think the opposite, that, you know, you're responsible for every little thing, and therefore, you know, you got to work on your attention and all sorts of stuff. There are two kinds of animals, mainly one whose defense is obscurity, shunning death, avoidance of danger, the other whose defense is attack. Yes, we're all right, so long as we make ourselves feared, but Victorian prudery turned our tigers into oxen. We found that it was wrong to fight, dangerous to drink beer, wicked to love. Presently it was cruel to eat beef, immoral to laugh, fatal to breathe. Of course, we find out that all these artificial meats are not good, or of the worst, and artificial cheeses and all this stuff. Fatal to breathe. We went in terror of the omnipresent germ. Hence, we are fat, cowardly slaves. I hear that Kitchener is hard put to it to get his first 100,000 men. Only the public schools respond. Only gentlemen and sportsmen really love England. The people that have been cursed these last few years as tyrants and libertines, only the men. And few there are in the crowd of canaille, old women, slackers, valetudinarians, eaters of nuts. Nothing wrong with eating nuts, but you know, I'm not sure what they mean by that. I mean, if you overeat nuts, it's a good way to get fat, right? God rest the soul of Edward VII. I thought all would be well when Victoria died, but now, this is no hour of the night to lapse into poetry. Anyhow, Germany is nearly as bad with their Social Democratic Party. Do you think that? Cried Cyril, sharply sitting up. His gesture was indecipherably intense. He seemed utterly disproportionate to Bowling's causal commonplace. Now, of course, the Bolsheviks of Russia were using the Hebrew term Nazi to refer to, you know, calling those people overseers, but they were a party that was more oppressive. You know, the USSR and all that was more oppressive and more murderous than the NSDAP, which was to rise in the decade after this. But well, I don't remember when the started, but okay, well, okay, well, there was a German Workers' Party for a couple years, and the NSDAP didn't, what, from 1920 or 21. It took almost 2 decades for people to realize that it was a problem. And actually, even after it was a problem, you know, it took some time. But anyways, you know, a lot of political divisions don't really, like one's so much better than the other, right? I know it. Even when you get that bad, there's some competitor for that, right? I know it's one of the chief causes of the war. The Zabern incident shown the Junkers that they were safe only for a year or two. After that, the people would start out to be too proud to fight, replied Lord Antony, anticipating a transpontine chameleon. And so, Cyril's voice trembled, a tense thrill ran through his body. He'd become sober in an instant. The court party wanted war, to bring back the manly spirit to the nation, and instantly to keep their place in the sun. Now, in my country, there's people crying that there's not a nuclear war because they stupidly think that's something that's going to bring sun on earth, right? And leave pollution that can kill people or shorten the lives and whatnot for 300,000 some odd years. I don't remember exactly how long it takes before it completely neutralizes in all environments. You're not going to save lives through that. And people don't think about outside of the initial blast. 10 times the people can die. But anyways, the boy sank with a large sigh into his seat. His tone changed to its old supercilious slurring. Now, yeah, you can, a mannishness or nobility of certain respects, just insisting everybody goes off to war and follows along isn't exactly going to bring it either. Bloody Bill was afraid for his destiny, scared green. Don't talk for 5 minutes. There's a good chap. I've a strange feeling come over me, almost as if I were going to think. Lord Antony obliged with silence. The 5 minutes became 20. Then Cyril spoke. I had better get to Cripps, double quick, said he. I'm his intelligence officer, and I think it my duty to inform him of the plans of the German Great General Staff. Yes, you should certainly do that, answered Lord Antony, laughing. Then let's stroll up the boulevard. Dawn's breaking. We'll get a café Biroche at the rotunda, and then I'll tyrannize my tailor and get off. They went out in the cold morning air. 300 yards away, outside the Santa prison, a small crowd had collected. The center of attraction seemed to be a framework, 2 narrow uprights crowned with a crossbar, where a triangular piece of metal glittered in the pale twilight. Peace hath her victories no less renowned in war. Drawled Cyril cynically, confess that I have entertained you royally. Here is a choice savory to wind up our feasts. Lord Antony could not conceal his horror and repulsion, for he knew well enough what slight chance had prepared for them, but the fascination drew him far more surely than if his temperament had resembled that of his friend. They approached the crowd. A ring was kept about the framework by a cordon of police. Just then the gates of the prison opened, and a little procession came out. All eyes were drawn instantly to the central figure, an old man whose jaw was dropped, and from whose throat issued a hoarse howling, utterly monotonous and inhumane. His eyes were starting from his head, and their expression was not one to be described. His arms were bound tightly to his sides. 2 men were half supporting him, half pushing him, save for his horrible cry. There was no sound. There was no movement in the crowd, no whisper. Like automata, the officials did their duty. In a trice, the prisoner was thrown forward on a board, thrust up towards the framework. His caterwaul suddenly ceased. A moment later, a sharp order rang out in the voice of one of the prison officials. The knife fell from the crowd. Burst a most dreadful sound, an awe so low, so fierce, that it had no human quality. Lord Antony Bowling could never be sure whether it was after that or before it that he heard the head tumble into the basket. Who was it, ex-Cyril, of the bystander? Un Anglais, answered the man. The Doctor Balak. Cyril started back. He had not recognized his old enemy. But even at that moment he was accosted by one whom he would never fail to know. Even dressed as he was in the uniform of a French colonel, Douglas, on his arm was a child whose eyes were blear, artery with debauchery, who staggered, her eyes rolling, her hair disheveled, her mouth loose and wet, laughing with indecent and profane intoxication. Good morning, Captain Gray. Well met indeed, began Douglas, urbane in his triumph. I trust you passed a pleasant time in the Pauls. Very pleasant, returned Gray. Dr. Belloc, continued Douglas, crossed my path. I am glad you should have seen the end of him. I am glad, said Cyril. And what end do you think I have reserved for you? Said the sorcerer, with sudden foam of ferocity. Something charming, I am sure, said Cyril sulkily. I always admired your work, you know, that translation of the book of the sacred magic of Abramelin, the mage, in particular. You remember the passage about the wicked Antony of Prague, he went on with sudden force and solemnity, the marvelous things he did, and how he prospered, and how he was found out by the roadside, his tongue torn out, and the dogs to feast upon his bowels. Do you know what has saved you so far? Only one bar between you and destruction, the love of your wife, whom you have murdered. With that, Cyril cried aloud 3 words in a strange tongue, and giving the other no chance to reply, marched rapidly away with his friend. Douglas could not have recovered. In any case, he was as one stunned. How did this boy know of the death of his wife? Well, that might be understood, but how did he know his most secret fear? The fact that since the crime, his demons had lost their courage. He shook the feeling off and turned again to gloat over the death of Belloc. Who was that ex-Poling? The Grand Panjandrum himself, with the little round button on top. That's Douglas. The Black Lodge man, X-Man. I see daylight. Belloc was condemned, you know, for a crime done 20 years ago. Douglas must have known about it and betrayed him. That's the regular thing. How does he come to be a colonel in the French army? Don't know. He was close in with 1 or 2 ministers. The Cossacks, the Cassau, I think in particular, there's a lot of politics and occultism, as you know. I'll think that over. I might ask the minister this morning. But I tell you, it's no time for trifles. Ever since all the mobilization plans were scrapped out by the failure of Ligue and Nummer to hold out, distraction has reigned supreme. No causal mistress, but a wife and procuress to the lords of hell at that. Do not quote Tennyson, even mixed, under the shadow of the lion, Lion de Belfort. As trifles, there are none in war. Ask the Germans if you don't believe me. A little later, after the Rotonde Café in the Boulevard Montparnasse had refreshed them with its admirable coffee, and those brioches which remind one of the boyhood's earliest kisses. They walked down to the Place de la Concorde and parted. Well, it was definitely a boy, you know, because you see the movies and you're on the playground and got to convince one of the you know, when you're you're 8 years old or whatever to and yeah. Cyril went on the opera to his tailor in the Rue de la Paix. Rue de la Paix? I'm not sure. His mind was full of meditations upon the details of the great idea that had come to him, the divination of the enemy's objective. His suggestion had made Lord Antony laugh. He himself had never felt less like laughing. He was on fire with creative genius, and terrified lest his work should fall upon barren soil. While he knew how hard it is to get power to listen to reason, at the corner of the Place de l'Opera, he lifted his eyes to assure himself of a free crossing. The mind of Abdul Bey was in turmoil. His first night upon the yacht had been mere wallowing in debauch, but he woke with a clear head, acutely alive to the complexity of his situation. He was personally triumphant. There was nothing in his private affairs to worry him, but in charge as he was of the Turkish secret service in Paris, he knew the political situation well enough. He knew that Turkey would throw in her lot with Germany sooner or later. He was doubtful as to the wisdom of returning to France. On the other hand, duty called him with a clarion voice, and he wanted to have as many fingers as possible in the pie. After much consideration, he thought he would land at Barcelona and get through with his American passport, for he had papers from most nations. As a distracted millionaire, his companions, both American citizens, would aid the illusion. Supposing that there was already trouble or suspicion, this subterfuge would serve. Once in Paris, he could find out how the land lay, and act accordingly. He gave orders to the captain to make for Catalonia. The voyage was uneventful, save for the brief visit of a cruiser, which discovered nothing contraband. In fact, Abdul and Lisa remained drunk the whole time, only just off the Spanish coast. A capful of wind once again interfered with Lisa's enjoyment of the honeymoon. It had another consequence, more serious. No sooner had they landed at Barcelona than Lisa became suddenly and terribly ill. After a week, the doctors decided upon a radical remedy operation. The next day, a girl child entered the world very much alive, despite the irregularity of her entrance. No ordinary child either. She was a beautifully made baby, with deep blue eyes, and she was born with 4 teeth, and with hair 6 inches long, so fair as to be silvery white. Like a tattoo mark just over the heart was a faint blue crescent. Lisa recovered rapidly from her illness, but not too quickly for the amorous Turk, though he was surprised and annoyed to find that she had recovered her early grace and activity. The fat had gone from her in the 3 weeks of illness, and when she began to be able to move about and drive in the city, she looked once more almost as she did on the night when Cyril first saw her. A joyous, buxom, vigorous woman. The change cooled Abdul's ardor, and her own feelings altered with it. Her lover's sloppiness began to disgust her. As to the child, it was a source of irritation to both of them. Kremers again was hardly a boon companion. She would have depressed a hypochondriac going to the funeral of the beloved uncle who had left him nothing. Before Lisa had been out of bed 3 days, a crisis arose. She felt instinctively that Paris would be no fun and wanted to go to America. Abdul felt that he must lose no time in getting to Paris. Kremers, for some reason, had changed her mind about reporting to Douglas. She was homesick for West 186th Street, so she said. The explosion came at lunch. The Spanish nurse, having failed to muffle the baby with due adequacy. "Ah, hell," said Abdul Bey. "God knows I don't want the little beast," said its proud mother. "Look here," remarked Kremers. "I do want it, sure, some baby." "Oh, hell," repeated Abdul Bey. "Look here, you give me the rocks, and I'll take her across the pond. There's ships. Give me $3,000 and expenses, and $3,000 every year, and I'll fix it. You folks get off." and paint Paris pink. Is it a go? Abdul Bey brightened immediately. Only one thought chilled him. What about Douglas? So the child was going to be raised quite well, obviously. What about Douglas, he said. I'll tend to that. It's a good scheme, muttered Lisa. Let's get away tonight. I'm sick of this hole. She caressed the Turk warmly, but Paris was no longer the Paris of her dreams. No longer the Paris of idleness and luxury, where the good Americans go when they die. It was a Paris of war, of stern discipline, of patriotic enthusiasm, nothing less than a nightmare for the compatriots of the lady who didn't raise her boy to be a soldier. She blamed Abdul, who shrugged his shoulders and reminded her that she was lucky to get there at all. That the Germans were likely to be in the city in a week or so. She taunted him. He let loose his ancestral feelings about women, those which lie deep buried in all of us, who are at least not utterly degenerate in soul. However loose morality may have crept us upon the surface. She rose in the automobile just as they crossed the Place de l'Opera and broke her parasol over his head, which has nothing to do with the Queens of Stone Age, the Stone Age song. Then turned her nails loose on his eyes. He fisted her in the abdomen, and she collapsed into the seat of the car with a scream. It was this that diverted the attention of Cyril Gray from his contemplation of the designs of Germany. The boy made a leap and had Abdul by the throat in a moment, dragging him out of the car and proceeding to administer summary castigation with his boot. But the police interfered. 3 men rode up with drawn sabers and put an end to the affair. They arrested all parties, and Cyril Gray only escaped by the exhibition of that paper which had won him such respect months earlier in the shambles of Moray Railway Station. I have to go to my tailor. Service of the minister, he remarked with a cynical smile, and was dismissed with the profoundest respect. After all, it was no business of mine, he muttered as he wriggled into his new tunic, to the immense admiration of the tailor, a class whose appreciation of manly beauty depends so largely upon the price of the suit. It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. The trouble comes when you can't lose them. Poor old Lisa, poor old Abdul. Well, as I said, it's none of my business. My business is to divine the thoughts of the enemy, and, oh Lord, how long? To get the powers that be to understand that I am right, considering that they needed 8 million marching men to persuade them that bloody bill meant war. I fear that my task may be no sinecure. No sinecure. He went to the barracks, where a military automobile was waiting for him, and told the chauffeur, with better wit, to go out and meet General Cripps. As to Lisa and the Turk, it was 24 hours before they were set at liberty. The sight of Cyril, his prompt intervention in her defense, relit the flames of her half-crazy passion. She rushed over the studio to see him. It was shut up, and the concierge could give her no news. She drove wildly to the profess's house in Montmartre. There, they told her that he had gone to join the British Army. Various excited inquiries in official quarters led her at last to Lord Antony Bowling. He was genuinely sympathetic. He had liked the girl at first sight, but he could hold out no hopes of arranging for her to see him. There is only one way for you to get to the front, said he. Join the Red Cross. My sister's here, forming a section. I'll give you a note to her, if you like. Lisa jumped at the suggestions she saw more vividly than if it were actual. The obvious result. Cyril would be desperately wounded, leading the last victorious charge off the dragoons against the walls of Berlin. She would interestingly nurse him back to life, probably by means of transfusion of blood, and raised to peerage Marshal Earl Grey of Cologne, where he had swum the Rhine, and tearing the keys of the city from the trembling hands of the astonished burgomaster, had flung them back across the river to his hesitating comrades, would lead her with the Victoria Cross in gold and diamonds on his manly bosom to the altar of St. Margaret's, Westminster. It was worthwhile learning magic to become clairvoyant like this. She dashed off, still at top speed, to enroll herself with Lady Marcia Bowling. She gave no further thought to Abdul. He would never had attracted her, had she not perceived a difficulty in getting him. So yeah, focus on character, folks. Don't make it about some physical thing, right? Even that physical thing is ease or difficulty in acquisition, you know. As to that gentleman himself, if grief tore at his heartstrings, he showed it that night in an unusual way. It may have been but simulation of philosophical fortitude. There is no need to inquire. His actions are of more interest. They consisted of picking up a cocotte on the Boulevard des Italiens and taking her to dinner in the Café de Paris. At the conclusion of a meal which would have certainly been prescribed as a grief cure to any but a dyspeptic, the maitre d'hotel approached their table and tendered with a bow an envelope. Abdul opened it. It was a summons from Douglas to appear immediately in his presence at the apartment in the Faubourg Saint-Germain. The Turk had no choice but to comply. He excused himself to his fair guest at the cost of 100-franc note and drove immediately to the rendezvous. Douglas received him with extreme heartiness. 1,000 congratulations, dear young man, upon your brilliant victory. You have succeeded where older and more learned men fail badly. I called you here tonight to tell you that you are now eligible for a place in the 14, the Gagail 4. A seat is vacant since this morning. They executed Balak. Douglas nodded with a gloating smile. But why did you not save him, master? Save him? It was I that destroyed him when he tried to betray me. Candidates, take notice. Save. That right there is enough reason to not, be a part of some organization that's going to require crime of you. Because as much as they say it's, they don't have the morals, well, they are going to use it against, they could use it against you, Abdul protested his loyalty and devotion. The supreme test, continued Douglas, cannot conveniently be imposed in time of war. There is too much to do just now, but as a preliminary, how do you stand with Germany? Abdul shrank back, startled out of his presence of mind. Germany, he stammered at last. Why, Colonel, he emphasized the title, I know nothing. I have no instructions from my government. He met the eye of his master and read its chill contempt. Dare you play with me? The young man protested that no such thought had crossed his mind. In that case, pursued the sorcerer, you won't know what that means. Douglas took from his pocket a 50-franc note. 50-franc note. The Turk caught it up. His eyes grown momentarily wider with surprise. Examine it, said Douglas coldly. The Turkish agent held it to the light, and the figures numbering the note were 2 small pinpricks. Allah, he cried. Then you are. I am. You may as well know that my colleague is in the lodge. AB is going to stir up trouble for the British in India. Her influence with certain classes of Hindus is very great. For your part, you may try discreetly to tamper with the Muslim section of the French troops. the Africans. But be careful, there is more important work to your hand, no less than the destruction of the French armies in the field. Now let us see what you can do. I am going to send you to my little garden hermitage, where I occasionally appear in the character of a great ascetic. There is an old lady there devoted to me. Have your best man there to play yogi. In the garden, here's the plan. Is the terminal of a wire. There's another in that house where you got baptized and married. Remember? Thence there's a cable up a sign to another cottage where that old Belgian mystic lives, the friend of Metterlink. Ha ha! He's really von Walder, a dressed vendor, and he's in charge of another cable, underground, 300 miles, thanks to the Cassau, who helped us with the road squads, to a place which by now is firmly in the hands of the Crown Prince. So all you have to do is to tell your man to sit and pretend to meditate and tap. I shall send you plenty of information from the front. You will know my agents by a nick filed in a trouser button. Each message will have a number so that you will know if any go astray. All clear? Admirable. I need not say how proud I am to find that we are on the same side. I was very frightened of that uniform. La habit ne fait pas le moine, replied Douglas gaily. And now, sir, let us spend the night discussing our plans in detail, and some very excellent whiskey which I happen to have by me. The spies pursued their double task with pitiless energy till morning was well broken. Later in the day, Douglas left for Soissons. He was attached to the French army as chief of a corps of signalers. Thanks once again to the good offices of Cassau, his plans were perfect. They have been cut and dried for over 15 years. And chapter 23 is going to be the arrival of a Chinese god upon the field of battle, of his success with his superiors, and of a sight which he saw upon the road to Paris, also of that which thereby came unto him, and of the end of all those things whose event begat a certain beginning. Now, sometimes Drek of the Order of Nine Angles, or some group that stems off of them, that's no longer Order of Nine Angles, or never was in the first place, but required some Order of Nine Angles cosmology and training or whatever. That, you know, your typical insight roll is weeks or months, but some are years. You know, you marry somebody, they have children, you raise the children towards, you know, so yeah, you got, and spies too, you know, people can be under for quite some time.